guys? It's mid-September, just a few days before archery opener in New Hampshire. It's one of my favorite times of the year. I like it when the weather starts cooling down. I'm out on one of my favorite lakes to ice fish, but it's a lake that I've never fished through the open water. And I do know that this time of year, the panfish start moving into the deep water basins and staging up, and that's where they'll spend most of the winter until they spawn. So I've come out to see if I can find out if that's happened yet. Should, the water's cooling down. We did have a couple of warm days, but we've had cool nights and the water temps have cooled, so fish should be in these basins. I got my Vexillar, my 7-foot Jason Mitchell Pro Series walleye rod. Pretty psyched to be out today. It's a beautiful morning. It was 94 degrees yesterday. I was going to come out yesterday afternoon. It was just too hot. So stay tuned. Hopefully I can get some footage. I got the GoPro too. I'll be wearing the GoPro, and hopefully I can get some footage of some deep basin panfish. I'm going to be fishing in 40 and 50 feet of water today. That's going to be my target depth. And we'll go from there. And, no music on this one, no frills. Just hopefully information. I'll talk a little bit later about line types again. On the last one I did, you couldn't really hear me very well, and I was a bit distracted. So let's see if I can't provide a little more clarity on that. It's not so hard to hear. So stay tuned. So today I'm basically going to use the same techniques that I would use while I'm ice fishing, jigging for these panfish. And I'm just going to bounce that jig because I'm going to be using mostly vertical jigs. I may cast some crankbaits a little later, but right now I'm going for the vertical jigs. These fish seem to be just moving through in schools. There's a school of fish, guys. Got one on. Looks like they're here. Nice crappie. Oh yeah, decent crappie right there. That's a pretty nice fish. I'm going to use a combination of things, but today I don't even know where I got these. They've been in my tackle box forever, but they glow in the dark. I don't know how well you can see it, but that's what I'm using, and they seem to come right in and whack it. I'm not keeping any fish today, so we're going to let this guy go. I've had a lot of trouble with YouTube lately detecting the music on my videos, on the journals, and they disable mobile viewing. And a lot of people are saying that they can't watch the videos because their primary method is to use their iPhone or whatnot. So I've decided, between that and my desire to provide more useful information on my videos, I'm going to do less music, or no music, except maybe the intro. That's a nice one. For my jig. Not bad. thing I wanted to talk about today is line types. touched on it briefly in my last video. Wanted to give it a little more attention in this one. There seems like different types of line that are out there and available. Leave a lot of anglers confused. The traditional monofilament line is just fishing line. When you think fishing line, that's what most people visualize is monofilament, which is just nylon that's extruded into a specific diameter that has a specific tensile strength or pound test. A 4-pound test, 6-pound test, 8, 10, I've seen 150 pound tests. And monofilament will float when you use it, but it will also absorb a little bit of water, and what that does is makes it slightly stronger when it absorbs that water. Mono comes in really handy at times like fishing topwater lures. Because of the fact that it floats, it tends to stay on top and it won't pull your topwater lures down. Some of the lighter topwater lures, sinking line will pull the lure down. So it comes in handy then. But if you were fishing a Senko, fishing in around rocks, things like that, something that's on the bottom, or maybe you're fishing bait for brown trout, bank fishing with worms. When I was a kid, we used to bank fish for browns with just worm on the bottom, night crawler, not bluegill, but bullheads, hornpout, catfish, bottom fish that where you're fishing bait, leaving your line sitting on the bottom. You might want to go with a copolymer, because copolymer sinks. What copolymer is it's monofilament with another material bonded to it or fused to it. Sometimes that's done molecularly and makes it extremely abrasion resistant. And the fusing process often makes copolymer thinner in diameter than monofilament. So you could have a 6-pound test copolymer that's thinner typically than the equivalent in monofilament. So it's handy for that. It's more limp, it's more castable. I like copolymer most of the time if I'm fishing a monofilament type line. I'll fish copolymer. I don't mind that it sinks because I'm typically fishing lures anyways, and it's moving, and it's very abrasion resistant, so it holds up well when you're fishing around rocks. If you're fishing, a lot of times you get fish that are down in and around the rocks, you might want to use a copolymer. And it doesn't have high memory, so you can spool an entire spool up with it, and it won't have all those kinks in it that most anglers are familiar with. And then there's fluorocarbon, which is most often used as a leader material. It's not too often, not too many people will spool up an entire spool with it, but sometimes there are some good fluorocarbons out there with low memory. But for the most part, they have a pretty high memory. 2 and 3 pound tests for ice fishing, it's just horrible. When you're fishing these, really light 12 millimeter tungsten jig with 2 pound test line, fluorocarbon, it slows its ability to sink, so it doesn't fish as fast. When you're fishing those tiny jigs and you're in 30, 40 feet of water like I am now, you've got to get that down there. There's the fish. You got to get it down quick while the school is still there. You want it to fish fast, so fluorocarbon, at least in my opinion, isn't very good for ice fishing. But it makes great leader material, especially for like striped bass, because one thing fluorocarbon does when it hits the water is it disappears. It becomes almost invisible to fish. So it makes great leader material, because if you're fishing like braided line, something that the fish can see really well, and like today I'm fishing in like 40 feet of water with just a really small panfish jig on, and I had braided line, actually a 30 pound test braided line. It's the same same rod and reel setup that I've been fishing striped bass with, walleye, all summer long. And I just changed the diameter of my leader. My fluorocarbon leader is all I do. So fluoro is great for that. It's extremely abrasion resistant, holds up to the rocks and stuff. However, once you do get a nick in fluorocarbon, it becomes extremely weak in that spot. And will almost certainly break if you get a fray. So if you're fishing around structure for like black sea bass, any of those bottom fish, saltwater fish that in around rocks and structure, and they get you in around a piling and fray your line, you're better off to change your leader. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a break off sooner or later. And then there's braided line, Power Pro, Fire Line, those types of line, which most people are familiar with. And I'm fishing with Power Pro today. It's 30 pounds, and braided line is just that. It's just several strands of line braided together, or filaments all braided together. And Power Pro is made from the same material they make Kevlar out of. So it's really strong. I like it. But you can't always tie directly to your lure. Oftentimes when I'm lure fishing for stripers, especially early in the season when they're really hungry, I can get away with it. I tie directly to my lure and it works fine. Doesn't seem to bother them. But later in the season they start getting a little leader shy, and you got to put on a fluoro leader, which is fine. You just got to make sure you tie a good knot. And there are a ton of knots out there. YouTube's the greatest resource in the world for tying knots and learning how to tie one line to another and what those lines might be. There are a million videos, really good videos, informative, show you how to tie those knots, Palomar knots. Blood knots for tying on leaders are preferred by a lot of people. So, just cruise YouTube if you want to know more about how to tie on leaders, what knots to use, nail knots, whatever. The problem with braid is oftentimes when you braid several strands together, the line has a tendency, or the braid has a tendency to flatten out. Anybody that's ever seen a braid, that it's wider one direction than it is the other. It's kind of flat. And that's what happens when you braid several strands together. And that's one of the reasons I like the Power Pro is when they braid it, it's rounder than a lot of the other braids out there. Plus they coat it so it's not so hard on the guides, because some of the braids have a tendency to really wear down the guides, especially if you're catching 20-pound fish. I spent the majority of better half of May and June and into July catching 20-pound fish every day, and with an abrasive braided line I would have worn the guides out on my rod, and I don't want to do that. So that's just a general rundown of some more common line types and where they might be useful. So basically all I'm doing today, guys, is I'm getting on the upwind edge of these deep basins. This particular lake has 3 really deep basins, 40, 50 feet of water, 30 feet of water. I'm just getting on the upwind side and just drifting across them until I find a school of fish. Using the Vexilar, just drifting along and find a school of crappie and fish them. And it's just like ice fishing. They don't really stay in one place for too long. They move around quite a bit. There's a fish. They're definitely staged over these holes. They're not down very deep, but they're here. So all the same rules apply, guys, when you're ice fishing. You want to make sure you get that knot moved around so that jig hangs vertically or horizontally for vertical jigging. promised you guys another major announcement. So here it is. At the end of September, towards the end of the month, there will be no more Seacoast Guide Service, no more SGS Outdoor Video Journal, no more SGS Army, no reference at all to Seacoast Guide Service. However, we're not going anywhere. We're just changing the name. I figured with all the irons I have in the fire with the writing and pro staffing, guiding, that it would be easier to come up with a name that would incorporate everything that I do. So towards the end of the month, we're going to change the name to Tim Moore Outdoors. That will make it easier to find everything all in one place. Go to one website. We won't be scattered, and everything will be associated with the same name. So the video journals will be called Tim Moore Outdoors, maybe Tim Moore Outdoors TV, and the guide service will be Tim Moore Outdoors. So nothing's going away except the name. We appreciate all the support with Seacoast Guide Service up to this point. Had a lot of fun with that name, and the SGS and SGS Army and all that, and we look forward to all your continued support. So make sure at the end of the month you check out timmooreoutdoors.com. SeacoastGuideService.com will redirect everybody to the new web address. The site won't change much. Nothing's really going to change except for the name. Hopefully we can increase our views and our customer base and our services and become the most professional organization in the outdoor industry that we can possibly be.